Test. This is a test.
Okay.
Just so you know, we are live now, okay?
Okay.
So we're
Sounds
going
good.
live on YouTube.
Okay.
Sounds good.
So just so you know, when you talk and everything, it's going to be live. So I'm just about to
Okay.
give Sylvia the URL.
Just so you know, we are live now, okay?
Okay. Been good so far. I know we're live. Mhm.
Test.
Ready? 3 minutes.
Andy, we saw you had this RAF uniform behind you in the early times of the chat. We're talking about why that could be.
It's a
There you go.
yeah, it's a Royal Flying Corps, 1916.
Moment.
Yeah, before the Royal Air Force was formed in 1917. So originally the Navy and the Army had their own separate air teams, and this was an Army one. So here we go. So we better shut up about that. I'll tell you later. It's going to be the slowest 3 minutes ever. 1 minute to go. Okay. Ready to go? Yep.
You're ready.
Okay. Can everyone see that? Cool. Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. We've all met very recently, like 5 minutes ago. We've been talking for a few hours. I want to just take you through today a quick pit stop of what I would be doing if I was setting up a game studio in 30 minutes or less. So I always think the only easy day I've ever had in my life was yesterday, on the basis that I got through it and I got a bit of experience. I'm not sure about today, still unsure about today. It's developing okay. I'm sure by tomorrow we'll look back on this today collectively and say that wasn't so bad, but this morning it was quite daunting. So that's the logic we're using. The aim of the session is to cover 7 points very, very quickly around the business. What game do you want to make? What game business model will you choose? Why will your game be special and why will it stand out? Which platforms do you focus on and why? Importantly, how do you finance or get your game and team commissioned? How are you going to get your game to market? And what's your medium long-term destination? A lot of these subjects will be properly dealt with by the experts that are coming after me. So I'm just going to give it a flavor and hopefully try and set them up in some way. But that's what we're looking to do. So let's look at the game first of all. Choose your game and press start. So really, what's the idea? What's the idea behind the game? Today, we've heard brilliantly 8 different game ideas, all very different from you guys. All of them have been interesting. All of them have been quite exciting for different reasons. So what's that idea and what's the creative goals that you're looking to overcome or achieve, depending on how you look at these things? What's the creative path you're going to take? All of you have got clear ideas around your creative goals and you've had clear ideas around your creative paths. None of you that I think have gone down the licensed IP route, just in case you fancied that. But some of you, in the course of your career ahead of you, may well end up with opportunities around licensed IP. We shall see. I think understanding the genre of the game that you're going to make is really, really important. And we've had discussions this morning around genres, specifically when we're trying to understand the games that you've been pitching. Genres pretty important. Obviously, skills that you're going to need in the team goes without saying, but in no particular order: coding, game design, art, music, sound, marketing, community, biz dev, and finance. Perhaps the marketing, community, biz dev, and finance piece comes a bit later, because at heart, you're all games developers. So you're going to deal with the first 5 or 6 areas and grow into the other areas. But that can be part of your team. It can be part of your partnerships with others, however that may be. Who's in the team? Really important. You've made presentations today. You've talked about the individuals in the team. That's vital. You are, to us right now, as pitchers, you're the most important people because you're pitching. But right behind you is your colleagues in your team. And it's important that we're clear about who those guys are. Really important is the budget. What do you need? You know, what have you got? What do you need? You need to get your project costings right. That's really, really difficult. I'd say it's probably impossible to do, but you've got to get to a degree of certainty because it's a serious business asking for money. Think about also what other games are similar to the ones that you want to make. Are you making something new or better than what's been made already? Hopefully new and better, but you know, you never know. Quick whiz through business models. You'll all know this stuff to a greater or lesser degree, but we've got a few different business models just to quickly run through. So free to play, sort of AAA. This is probably not where you're going to be right now, but some of you may well get into that in due course as you follow a path to success. But these games all start off as free. You know, the downloads are online. They're on all of the time, so they're a service, and frankly, they're more free to start than necessarily free to play forever. All of them are monetized via in-game purchasing, not really pay to win much. And I think that probably won't be a case for some time. But you know, fashion items and stuff are really, really important. I'm spending a lot of time in the NFT space at the moment. Whole different talk there, but that's really interesting in terms of how that area around fashion and stuff is developing like crazy. It's great. Great examples of free to play. We all know, we've all played Fortnite, Dota 2, Hearthstone, League of Legends. Fortnite's just massive and continues to be massive, as are all those other games. It makes it very difficult for all of us who are making newer games, smaller games, to get attention from players. But that's the world we're in, so we have to deal with that. And you've got, you know, economies built with their own currencies. And again, in the crypto area, I'm seeing a whole bunch of stuff going on that makes crypto and video games, you know, they're going to come together at some stage if they're not already. And it's going to get really, really interesting. And lifetime revenues for games like Fortnite, I mean, around about 3 billion. I think they're probably more than that right now, but that's interesting. AA games, AAA games, again, probably not where any of you are at the moment, but you could easily get to, especially if you were to look at, you know, perhaps helping bigger studios with some outsourcing, which is a good way of getting vital experience, hands-on experience, and at the same time, potentially bringing revenues into your studios. But, you know, the AAA games, all the large studios are building for PC and console, massively high quality graphics, sound production. Budgets can be enormous. I've put 2 million, everything's in pounds, but, you know, multiplied by $1.50. But, you know, 2 million is quite light. And in fact, some of you have been looking at budgets around that here. And I wouldn't necessarily put you absolutely in AAA categories right now. But normally, at the moment, AAA games are still sold at a premium price point. All of them are sold by digital methods nowadays. There is still a very big boxed market, but it's declining in terms of its share. One of the teams that's presented today mentioned that they wanted to make their game, you know, in a box as well, and more power to you for doing that. And you know the kind of AAA games that everyone's playing. You know, Grand Theft Auto 6 will come out. Who knows? Is it this 2022? I think something like that. Assassin's Creed, can't remember what one we're up to now, but there's loads of them. Same with Call of Duty. And obviously games like Mario Kart. And GTA is just crazy. I mean, it's sold, GTA 5 alone sold 140 million units since its launch, which is just mad. Freemium mobile, again, nobody, I think, today was looking at that particularly. Very, very difficult area to get right, but some of you could well end up in that place. And if you find yourself in that place, and you get it right, it can be exorbitantly profitable. Just ask anybody who works at any of the free-to-play mobile studios. Biggest one that we probably still Candy Crush, still there. Clash of Clans and all of those type games are crazy in terms of revenue. I founded a free-to-play studio, which I exited from last year, called Happy Nation, and it took us a long time to figure out what we were doing, and then we got it pretty right, I think. And the only thing I would say was that it creatively didn't necessarily float all of our boats, but there you go. That business made a lot of money. That's great, but creatively, okay. Subscription games still floating about. And in fact, if anything, now you could probably throw all of the Game Pass games and Apple Arcade games into this kind of bunch of subscription games. I think there's definitely more opportunities for smaller game studios to get their games included in the in the likes of Game Pass and potentially Apple Arcade as well, and being bought out by PlayStation. However, the buyout fees I think can be quite low. $250,000, $500,000 seems like a lot of money, but it's not if it's cost you that much, if not more, to make the game. So just be cautious about that, although it's definitely an option if you get it. So kind of, what and why indie games, really, leading sort of from the starting point, which would be indie games, through to AAA. I've kind of gone reverse, assuming, right or wrong, that all of you on this session, certainly in the room, so-called in the room, in the Zoom room, are much more likely to be indie studios, which I think you probably are. So look, indie games made by smaller teams, typically between 1 and 10 people. It's like a sports team, usually self-guided and driven, and usually wanting to make something different. I think all of you fall into that category, which is a compliment, by the way. Production values are necessarily going to be lesser fidelity, just because of budget, really, and time. But gameplay is really, really key. Pretty much most of the time, your players will buy the game and they'll own it. Most of the time, you're going to kick the production off by self-funding. And some of the time, you might even self-publish. But you may choose to work with a publisher. And all of the teams that I've spoken to today have definitely got an affinity with working with publishers, for sure. So that's good. Some of you work with publishers. Some of you have had different experiences with publishers. That's natural as well. Not all publishers are great. Not all developers are great. If great publishers can find great developers, great things happen. Pretty much all indie games will lead on PC. Why? Because you don't need permission to publish, really. You just got to go through and set up with Steam, and you've got a lot more flexibility. So that's generally why people will lead on PC. Plus the fact, that the PC community is enormous and quite open and accepting. We know that Steam's still the dominant platform. To be honest with you, I can't see that ever changing, but you never know. Most digital platforms will take about 30% of the revenue that they get from the consumer, from the player, and around about 6% of that, 6% in addition to that will be given somewhere to some country for tax. Don't ask me to get into the detail of that, it's complicated. But obviously Epic Game Store, which is a rival to Steam, have gone out with a point of difference, which is to take, between 12-15% rather than 30%. So that's an advantage for developers. They have not got the reach that Steam have, but no one has. Epic are doing a noble job, but Steam are dominant for a reason. So why is your game going to be special, and why will it stand out? Audience preference and taste changes all the time. We know that budget's no guarantee of quality, but you all need to get a budget together in order to make a game. You can't really make a game for nothing. You could make it in your spare time, and some of you are, but that doesn't mean it's cost nothing. So, budget's important. But take Assassin's Creed Valhalla, it's from what I understand, there's about 14 different studios at Ubisoft involved. Massive game. For anyone who's played it, enormously impressive game. Big, huge open world RPG based on Viking mythology, which is possibly relevant to the group we've got here. But I don't know the intricate political differences between the various countries in the Nordic region. So if I insult anybody, I do apologize. It's their latest episode, I suppose. No, the latest game in the massively successful franchise. And from what we can understand, around about 2.2 million copies have been sold since last November when it launched. So a lot of copies have been sold, and the revenue seems to be around 75 million pounds and counting all the time. So a game that's really delivered quality, delivered in terms of experience, and delivered in terms of making the budget back, most likely. So that's, you know, a special game. But look, then there's a game called Valheim, which I imagine a lot of people have played. And it's another Viking RPG, launched just after Assassin's Creed Valhalla, published by Coffee Stain, made by Iron Gate, over about 3 or 4 years. Swedish team, very small, 5-6 people, I think, something like that. Huge open world co-op, based on Viking mythology, loads and loads of bosses to take down. So really got something for everybody. Allows players to sort of build, craft and create, which is what we all like to do, in all sorts of randomly generated locations, which is brilliant. And it's easy going. So it allows you to have plenty of goes. And that is quite a cool thing. I think one of the things that in discussions with various friends and other players, feels like that comes across loud and clear. That's in early access on Steam. I'm not sure it's come out of early access yet, but it's, I don't know, £15, $20, that kind of thing. It's a huge amount. I mean, I don't know, 200,000 user reviews, all overwhelmingly positive. So massive, massive, massive community, 500,000 concurrent players at any one point, 6.1 million copies sold, according to the data we can get hold of, roughly around about 75 million in terms of revenue, and a development team of 5 people. Kind of similar, really, to the other Viking game. Both brilliant games, but both proving that, you know, it's not one size fits all. It's not either or. You can have a successful AAA game that really hits the mark, that, you know, is amazing, and you can have a successful indie version of the same type of subject matter that can also make good money. Now, I think Valheim is, without a doubt, an outlier. So I'm not saying that every indie team will get close to that, but it just shows you what's possible, for sure. So which platforms would you be looking at? Again, all of the people in these groups are pretty clued up on the platforms. I think that all of us would probably kick off with PC for the reasons that we've already discussed. It's a massive community, 130 million active monthly accounts at least. Konsoll is definitely a place to be, but players do expect big games, you know, impressive graphics, high production values, and promoting on these consoles is something that publishers can do very, very well. I think we've all seen, and some of us, including me, have been surprised how successful Switch has been. Not the machine itself, because I think that's a brilliant piece of engineering, but just how successful it's been for games developers. And especially that it sort of seems to have a bit of an affinity with kind of art house and in indie games, which certainly took me by surprise. And then, of course, last platform really is mobile, and nobody today really spent much time talking about mobile in terms of your own work. Not surprised by that. It's incredibly difficult to make a living out of mobile nowadays, and it's very much feast or famine. If you get it right, boy, do you get it right. If you get it wrong, boy, do you get it wrong. And I can point to my own experience in getting it right-ish and getting it very wrong. Yeah, I mean, was there luck involved? Possibly, but it's a pretty brutal experience. Interesting to see what Apple and possibly Google will do about that, if anything, if they can do anything. we shall see. Apple Arcade was a strategic move, seemingly by Apple, to try and get more games developers back to the platform. We'll see. I think the jury's out on that at the moment. Ella's going to cover a lot about the bringing the looking at the financing options for your games, but basically it kind of falls into, I've written 5 categories of funder. Really, I think it's 3. Games publishers, I think, are still the dominant because they understand the market, they understand the risk, they understand the process of green lighting, for want of a better phrase. So they've got teams that understand games. It's their job to understand games. They get judged on that, commercially and critically. So within games publishers, you will have expertise that should be able to identify if they believe your game is worth backing. Platforms as well have got massive expertise, and they are also looking for content, specifically PlayStation and Xbox, less so, frankly, with Nintendo. And they are always looking for 2 things. One, that will show their platform off at its best and will attract nowadays subscriptions, whether that's Game Pass or PSN. But they are also looking at strategically. So I don't think it's any secret that both those companies are looking to acquire more and more studio talent. And one way of doing that is to work closely with that studio talent and then think about potentially buying that studio talent. So we've seen that for the last sort of 3, 4, 5 years. That will only speed up, and Microsoft and Sony will invest more and more in terms of games developers. Financiers, Ella will talk a lot about this, will invest in games, and they're still mainly focused on free-to-play, but not exclusively. Financiers, don't underestimate them. They will have acquisition talent or investment talent that understands business models and it understands the content. They're not just a bunch of people in suits who are moving money around. No way. Those funds are specialists and know what they're doing. Probably less so than the publishers. You'd hope so anyway, but still not to be underestimated. Crowdfunding was a big thing. Kickstarter, specifically some years ago. It's less so now. It might make a comeback. I don't know, but it's there as an option, and some people still use it. And then there's kind of still strategic partners, which sometimes can be, I've written down here, like art benefactors, educational organizations, sometimes like museums, cultural organizations, stuff like that exists. Country by country, it varies. I think Norway specifically seems to have a very enlightened, long-term strategic vision about how to invest in games development talent. And I think from the outside, from the UK's perspective looking in, I think that the Norwegian ecosystem is well served by public financing. And I think that's a great thing. And one of the reasons why there's so many good developers on this call, because it's good. And you invest as a country in education, specifically STEAM skills, art as well as engineering and other technical disciplines. So that's great. Good on Norway. Well done. I think you can show the UK the way in that respect for sure. How do you bring your game to the market, and what are the roles of publishers? Kind of 2 broad categories of publishers. Don't at me on this, but there's probably loads more. But in my world, there's 2. There's the global publishers who will handle physical and digital sales. They will want to own all the IP. Pretty much, they want to own the IP. They've generally got proper vertical integration of all parts of the value chain, including finance. So that, in kind of plain English, is that they have got all of the departments that deal with all of the various things that need to happen, from the concept through to the gamer actually paying for the game in some shape or form. They've got everything in between. But it's a high-risk business, so they generally like to focus on franchises. But all franchises started with one particular game before they became a franchise, so they're not adverse to taking risk at all. but they do like to know what the risk is likely to be. And, you know, pretty much all of the global publishers will focus on online multiplayer games, you know, and just a couple of examples there: Activision Blizzard, Electronic Arts, Take-Two, Ubisoft, Epic Games, and Riot. And there's loads more. Then there's a second category, which is digital publishers. And these tend to be much far smaller and more niche, with you know, more likely to take risk. Some of them will outsource some of the verticals, you know, PR, comms, QA, testing, advertising, media, physical sales, merchandise. They might do that. But they will really focus on sales and allowing games developers to make the games that they generally want to make. Some of them avoid most of the financing of the game development, although that is changing. That's changing fast, because the serious digital publishers will have realized that they've got to back development talent. Otherwise, you know, development talent isn't just going to be able to make these games up in their spare time and arrive. That period was quite apposite probably 4, 5, 6 years ago. And it's becoming obvious to anyone who's looking that games developers can't just magic up the next game on the back of a wing and a prayer. Global examples of for me, great publishers in that category, without a shadow of a doubt: Devolver, Curve Digital doing a great job, Team 17 are doing a great job, Frontier doing a great job, Raw Fury doing a great job, and Tiny Build. Now there are plenty more, and you probably put Paradox in there to be a bit more local. But there's loads of them, but they're all doing great jobs. All of them will know exactly what they're looking for. And one tip at the moment is they're all busy, which means they've got more opportunities than there are teams out there. They've got less opportunities than there are teams out there. And as I said at the beginning of our session when we started this morning, it's a brilliant time to make games, a brilliant time to play games. It's never been easier to make games. It's also never been easier. It's never been harder to get deals, because there's so many people making so many great games. Okay, and just to sort of round off in terms of the journey and where we want to get to, all of you are studios, all of you are talented, all of you want to make games, all of you want to make your living from games. So where should you try and get to? At some stage, you would like to own your own intellectual property. That might not be possible on the journey to start with, but my advice is always to try and hold on to that as much as you can. A lot of you and other devs will try and publish their games themselves, and I would absolutely encourage everybody to give it a go. The reason I say that is because it's important to know what you don't know. And sometimes it's important to figure out the things that you really want to do, and then figure out the things that you can bring other experts and partners in to help. So if you don't publish your own games, then you're going to choose who you want to work with. But financing is a real key issue, very much so. And one of the biggest hurdles to overcome. All of you who will be successful, so picture you're now successful, and within the group today, there's at least 2 teams who've been around for 10 years. So, you know, hats off to them, done a brilliant job. You'll all have your own communities. You will have all spent time building those communities. Some communities will be growing, some will be stable, some might even be decreasing, but you'll have your communities. Hopefully, when you're looking at success, you'll have visibility over your sales and your data. When you cut your deals, if you cut your deals with publishers, make sure you get access to that data. Don't let them close you out on that. It's really, really important. Over time, you will build a valuable catalog. That does 2 things. Most obviously, it will bring you over time some royalties, some revenues that can drip into your business and at least pay for the coffee or whatever it may be. Also, that catalog will be your proof points to for the next deal. So, you know, today we've seen presentations and you've all referred to the games that you have built, or if you're new to it, you haven't. But that's really, really important. So revenue, ongoing revenue, royalty, and proof that you know what you're doing. Most of you will want to get, if you haven't, direct relationships with the digital platforms and the channels. So, you know, in other words, if you are working with a publisher, you should still know how to put your game on Steam, or indeed, you know, on the App Store. You should not just go put your fingers in your ears and say, I don't want to know that. You should find out about it and do it. Most of you, if not all of you, will have done that, because that's the kind of character types you are. And some good examples of developers who have become their own publishers here. We've got Mediatonic, who got bought last year by Epic, you know, the publishers of Fall Guys. Sumo Digital, who've just been bought by Tencent. Team 17, who are publicly listed in the UK. Rebellion, who are independent in the UK. Frontier, who are publicly listed in the UK, and Tencent own a bit of them as well. Positech, a one-person developer in the UK that has done brilliantly, making their own games. Jagex, I can't remember who owns them now. It's a private equity, but they're going to possibly be going for an IPO. But, you know, RuneScape is their big game. Been around for a long time. Playdemic, another very profitable mobile business. Golf Clash is their big game. Dovetail Games, they make Rail Simulator, as well as a fishing simulator, and are independent at the moment and looking to probably list at some stage on a stock exchange somewhere. And of course, Supercell, who have got plenty of investment into them, but an incredibly successful company based in Finland. There are loads and loads more, but all of those developers have taken control to a lesser or greater degree over their publishing, and are brilliant companies that employ plenty of really good, talented people and make a profit for their shareholders every year. That is the end of that. So thank you very much for that. Has anyone got any questions they'd like to ask? I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. Actually, yes, people have got some questions. Let's have a quick look. Sorry, that was a while ago. That's all gone. Okay, good. Thank you. Any questions there before I stop and hand over to the next person?
Yeah, and how do you see the Steam console, and are there new consoles coming that might be interesting?
Yeah, definitely. If I had more time over in my collection over here, I would bring out 2 Steam machines that I got given in Seattle. God, I can't remember, 7 or 8 years ago. And I had high hopes that those Steam machines would be amazing sort of PC console things. That didn't work out. The reason I say that, I've got them over there in a box because I won't throw anything away, is that Steam have been there, Valve have been there before. I think that puts Valve in a good position with the latest handheld that they're bringing to make a success of it. So I'm quite excited. But I get excited by this stuff anyway. I always do. I can't help myself. I'm sure there's some more less positive people than me that will say, oh, it'll never work. You know, they won't get this right. I'm excited. I think it could be amazing because I think what it could do for indie developers is give yet another really good outlet for their creations. And if it's like the normal Steam approach, which is effectively to allow developers to publish themselves without, you know, too much interference, let's say, from Valve, that could be really good too. So it could be that, you know, we're able to put our games on a really smart handheld console that isn't made by Nintendo or Sony. There you go. All right. Any other questions? Great. There we are. Okay, I think that I'm relieved that's out of the way. And I'm going to hand over now to Ella. Is that right, Ella?
I believe so.
Yeah, good. So we are running a little bit behind, but we knew that. So I've added 2 minutes to our backlog of 30, so we're now 32 minutes behind. But don't let that affect you, Ella. Go out for the full 30, please.
Okay, I will do. Right, I'm just going to share my screen. Let's get this. Can you all, oh, wrong slide. Can everyone see that? Cool. Right. Okay. So just briefly, I'm Ella Romanos, COO of Fundamentally Games. We're a publisher, but we focus specifically on publishing living games, so games as a service. But I started out as a developer in 2007 when I graduated and set up my first studio with some fellow graduates. I did that for 7 years. Then I spent about 6 years consulting, where I did a lot of work with developers, but also investment funds. So through the years, I've raised money for my own companies, including Fundamentally Games. And I've also helped a lot of developers raise funding, and I've advised investment funds on assessing and managing studios and games. So I've kind of had a bit of a broad range of experience, hopefully, which will be useful today. So what I'm going to talk about today is the different types of funding and what each type is suitable for. Now, this is obviously a really big area. There's a huge amount of funders out there. Andy, actually, your categorization was really good, I thought. But yes, there's a lot of different types. And so what I'm just going to try and do is paint a picture of the broad type. I'm going to do this by looking at the journey you go through to make a game, because the reality is that depending on where your game is, where your company is, where your team is, will vary the types of funding that you should be looking to apply for. So hopefully, whilst I'm going to give you a lot of information, it will be in context enough that you can kind of take bits away that are relevant to you without overwhelming you too much. So I also just note, just as a caveat, that this is a massive generalization because every fund and publisher has a slightly different remit. So this will be kind of the general approach. The only way to really know for sure is to do your research on each specific funder. But let's dive right in. So you are a startup, you have no funding, you don't have a prototype, you're completely new company. As you'll see as we go through, the earlier the stage, the harder it is to raise money because the risk is higher. But when you're really starting out, there are a few options. So accelerators. Accelerators can be really good, and I really like these programs, but they are about more than just funding. So, primarily you'd want to go on an accelerator. To be honest, you guys are all here. So in a similar vein to being here, you're there to learn and probably to network, to build relationships with potential investors. They often, alongside that, do provide some funding. That can be a really small amount just to kind of get you through the program, but it can also be a larger amount. So some popular games ones, Game Founders, GTR, Global Top Round, is a great one. And then you've also got a lot of tech accelerators, which can take games companies as well. So for example, New Chip and so on will also work with games companies. So these are really good if you're starting out and you need that advice and support plus the money, but they're not kind of where you'd go just for a single bit of money. Then so angels. So angel investors are essentially individuals who invest their own money in a company. They are investing equity, not into projects. And what they're looking for is essentially businesses that interest them and that they believe can succeed. What this means in practice is that usually you need to find someone who already understands games. And this will apply to all types of funders. If they don't already understand games or at least entertainment, it's going to be very difficult for them to assess the risk and the opportunity in what you're proposing, particularly as games is so kind of, for investors who've been doing much more traditional types of investment, it's so out there, it's very difficult for them to get their heads around. But there are angels who invest in games. There are people in the games industry who've made their money and therefore support other studios. There's a new angel investor network being set up, specifically focused on games. The challenge is that aside from these new networks, these people don't advertise themselves. So this is all about networking and building relationships. But the good thing about angels is that they often get involved early. They invest smaller amounts, but they will often group together. So for example, I know Mediatonic, when they first started out, had a group of investors, angels, including Ian Livingston, who came in and funded the company initially. And so they can be a really, really good way, and they will often take more of a risk than other types of investors because they'll get involved earlier. And then work for hire. I mean, I don't need to say much about this, but essentially you can do other work to fund your game. I tried doing this. It's really hard. I ran a successful work for hire studio, but it all went completely wrong when we tried to make our own games, because actually trying to make your own games and then please clients as well is really difficult. So can be done, but it's quite a slow route to do this, but it is a lower risk one. So it's definitely very popular, but there are implications of doing so. And then friends and family. I mentioned this not because this is open to everybody, but simply because it is important to know that other people sometimes do this. And it's relevant to know that, you know, sometimes when you're really frustrated and seeing other startups getting funded, sometimes it's purely, you know, that there's just reasons that they've managed to get funding that are outside necessarily just, you know, the company and the game. So then we move on to access to limited funds. And this is a really annoying catch-22 when you start up. Once you have some money, it's easier to get more money. And it's really annoying, but it is just the way it is. So once you have some money, things tend to open up, in particular, access to public funding. Now, I don't know the specific funds in Norway, but it sounds like there is quite a lot of support from what people have been saying this morning, which is amazing. And I don't know the specifics of those funds, but in general, a lot of public funds will come in earlier than private funds, simply because their entire remit is to grow the economy and to grow jobs. And therefore, they will take more of a risk on projects than the private investors will do. But a lot of them will match funds, so a lot of things in place for them to fund further. But at this kind of stage, when you've got some money but still haven't got a prototype, that can be a really good place. And to be honest, it sounds like you all know more about that than me, considering how many of you have had public funding by the sounds of it. And then at this point, depending on what your country has in terms of tax credits, and actually I'm not sure in Norway, but if you do have a tax credit system where the government essentially gives you money back against production, then you can actually start to get financing against that in the form of loans. And this can be really useful for cash flow. It's not the cheapest money, but it can be a really good way to cash flow the work that you're going to do and to help you kind of get started. Then we go, once you've got a prototype. So once you actually have something to show, life gets a little bit easier. And you open up other routes. So here we're looking at investment funds. So people who, again, are looking to invest for equity, so investing in the company. And this is specifically different to investing in projects like publishers do. So investment funds are looking to invest in companies who they believe can grow. You've got lots of different types of investment funds, and it can get really confusing and complicated. One of the most well-known types are VC funds, venture capitalists. So some examples: London Venture Partners, Mercia, Index. There's a whole load of them. The thing about VCs is they are looking for the next big thing. So they're looking for the next Supercell, the next Unity. If you are not the next Supercell or Unity, then you shouldn't be looking to VCs. It doesn't mean that you don't have a really attractive and viable business. It just means that you're not in the realm of a VC. And most businesses aren't, and that's okay. But I think that in games, we often think about equity and think about VCs as one thing, and they are just one type of investment fund. So if you're going to go down that road, think very carefully about what your aspirations are as a business, and if that's the route you want to go down. Aside from VCs, you do have other types of investors out there, investment funds. In the UK, we have quite a lot of investment funds that will invest kind of small amounts of money, say 150, 250,000 pounds. And they're looking for less growth than a VC, but they are looking for, obviously a viable business. There's quite a few out there that are specifically focused on games. And actually, I'm going to give you a link to where we have a list of investors like that available. But the thing is here, they're investing in the company, not the game. On the other side, once you've got a prototype, you can also start to talk to people about investing in your project. So I say project financing. Publishers are what we think of when we talk about project financing, but there are actually others. So for example, Kowloon Knights is an example where they invest in a project, but they don't publish your game. And it is important to think about those options as well, depending on what suits you. But project funding, it is exactly what it sounds like. They're going to invest in the game. They're going to get their money back from the revenues of the game. Now, I think in games, we often see publishers and project financing as favorable to equity in some cases. And I think it's important to think about what's right for you. A publisher will come in, they will fund the game. Once the game is done and they've made their money, they're gone. You don't have to work with them again. They don't have any input in your business. They don't take over or aren't in your business for the long term. But because of that, they have to make all of their investment plus profit back from that single game. So they will therefore want quite a lot of revenue from the game. Whereas an equity investor, You know, they will be involved in your business long term. They will probably interfere in your business itself, but they won't want to take all the money out immediately. They will want to be in for the longer term. So there's no better or worse. It's purely a case of thinking about what works for you. Do you want to be able to be supported long term? Do you want to be able to take the revenues from a game and keep them in the business to grow it further? Or would you rather just get support for the game, be done with it and move on? Often what you see is that companies start with project financing with a publisher, and then as they are ready to scale, they'll bring an equity financer in to really help them to grow. You've also got crowdfunding, which Andy mentioned. They actually released some stats today about the number of projects invested by Kickstarter, and it seems to be pretty steady, but almost all the projects raised less than $50,000, which is no surprise, but this is what it's always been. The reality is that Kickstarter doesn't actually fund your game. And that's pretty much always been the case. Kickstarter can be a great tool for marketing. It can be a great tool for other things, but it's not really, in most cases, a way to actually fully fund production. Tax credits. So I don't know if Norway has these, so I don't want to go into too much detail, but essentially, if they don't, they should, and you should all be pushing the government to do this, but essentially they should be giving you, get a percentage of your production spend back. And by this point, if you've spent money on a prototype, then you'd be able to claim the tax credits back and then use them for further development. And then we look at development grants. So by development grants, I mean private grants, of which the Epic Mega Grant is probably the best known. These tend to come and go because essentially platforms and technologies all need ways to showcase what they do and to build engagement by developers in their tools. So Oculus at one point was funding everything they could get their hands on. Magic Leap went through a phase of doing this. And so on. So all these different organizations will do this at a point. So it can be a really interesting thing because the money is sometimes even free. You don't have to pay it back. But there will be specific things that they're trying to achieve. So with Oculus or Magic Leap, they were trying to fund things that would showcase their technology and so on. So it's really, with anything like this, with a public fund or a development grant, it's really important to understand what they're trying to achieve and make sure your game appeals to that. I noted one of the teams here had actually received an Epic Mega Grant, which is great because it is really competitive, so well done. Yeah, and at this point, you've obviously still got access to angels and so on who may come on board as well. So then at some point, you've got good progress on a game. Now, by good progress, if we're talking about a product, we probably mean some kind of advanced demo. I personally hate the term vertical slice and think it should be banned, but it is often what people call a vertical slice, but nobody actually knows what that means. So, who knows? But from a game service point of view, what we really mean is beta. So from my point of view, when we're looking at games at this sort of stage, what we're saying is, can you prove that this game has potential beyond your own opinion? And I believe that actually applies to any game, not just games as a service, although that's where it's most commonly thought of. But ultimately, whilst your opinion is the only valid sort of reference point, it's very difficult for people to believe in it, because how do they know it's going to be successful? If you've had successful games before, then that helps in itself. But if the more you can do to prove that your audience actually wants this, the more likely you are to get investment of any kind. But once you've got further in the game, again, some other options open up. So you've got larger public grants. There are some European grants, for example, and at this point, they're often investing larger amounts of money, simply because obviously you've got further and you can show the potential for scale more. Now, I've got publishers in here. The reason that they're here rather than the stage before specifically is because in my experience, publishers now don't fund a prototype. It is very rare. They want to see more than that. And that's for many factors, including risk, but it's also due to the amount of content available and the fact that they frankly can wait that long. So yes, you may get some funding before, but the reality is that in most cases, you're going to need to get the game to a point where you can really showcase its potential for scale before they're actually going to invest. But it does depend on the publisher. Then you've got to a point where you're almost ready for launch. Now, at this point, there's some other options that open up. In particular, there's quite a lot of publishers who don't fund production, but they do fund marketing and other things. So this is particularly, again, in the games as a service space. There's a lot of publishers who don't fund production, but equally on other sides. So, if you don't actually need funding on production, but you need funding for marketing and for scale, then there are other people that become a potential for funding you at this stage. You also got finishing funds. Now, this is like kind of something that was really popular a few years ago and doesn't seem to be as popular anymore. But these were essentially funds that would come in and fund the last, say, 20-25% of production. My view, the reason we don't talk about it so much anymore is because actually a lot of publishers fit into this but just don't say it because they don't like to get involved very early. But either way, what you're really looking at here is somebody who's coming in to fund the last 20%. Maybe you need to build out more content before launch. Maybe you need funding just to get through early access. But it's really taking that game through the last stages and just helping you to get over that last line, basically. And then you launch your game. Now, at this point, other things open up. So mainly in the games as a service space, at this point, user acquisition is everything. So at this point, you start to open up doors for funding of user acquisition. Now, I'm not going to talk about this too much because I don't think many of you fall into this. But if you do, and this is probably a growth area for funding at the moment that I see in games, because there's a lot more funds opening up. The amount of money that you can access is significant. And if you can prove that the game has potential to scale through data, then you can access significant amounts of money to really scale it. But as Andy said, it's a really difficult market to get into. It's not something to be undertaken lightly. And then you've got private equity. So I mentioned this here simply because it's important to know that this exists, but this is something for much later. So private equity is where your business, you might have heard about Series A, Series B. This is where you really want to take your company to the next level. So you've already had a couple of games out, you've had successes, and you really want to scale. These guys will come in with 5, 10, 15, 20 million and really fund the growth of the business to accelerate it to a much larger scale. So just a few tips in terms, how am I doing time? Okay, just a few tips I want to talk through in terms of specific funds and also generally. So do your research on the fund. Every fund is different. And every fund has requirements and things that they're looking for. You can find, the best way to find this out, to be honest, is to go on their website, see what they say, but also look at the games that they funded. That's the best way to know, but also just ask them. It's absolutely valid to, ask for a meeting, to show them your game and just ask them, what are you looking for? What is it, your priorities? I think I sit in a lot of meetings and, I think developers are entitled to ask as many questions as we are. And actually it's good for you to show that you're kind of looking at your options and you're going to consider your options carefully and not just going to jump as soon as somebody wants to engage. And also, these funds do change over time. So particularly VC funds, they will have a remit for 5 or 7 years, and then they'll open a new fund and that may have a slightly different remit. So it's important to kind of keep up to date on who is looking for what, so that when you do pitch to people, well, firstly, you're choosing the right people to pitch to as much as you can, but secondly, that you're tailoring your pitch to what they need. When I've been pitching games, I generally have at least 2 or 3 versions of the pitch that are sort of tailored to slightly different requirements that different funds have, just to make sure that you're making it easy for them to understand how what you're offering fits with their remit. Because the reality is that they might love the game, but if it doesn't fit with what they need, they are allowed to fund, it doesn't matter how good it is. So making that easy for them is really useful. Separate pitch decks for funding types. So equity versus project funding and publishers, 2 different things. You need to have 2 different pitch decks if you're going for both. A publisher or project funding, you're focused on the game. We've seen some great examples of publisher pitch decks today. Equity pitch decks need to be focused on the company with the game as an example of the vision and what your company is doing. So I wouldn't ever try to have the same pitch deck for both. Keep them separate and structure them differently. Know your numbers. Now, depending, on who you're pitching to and the level of detail, but either way, you should know your numbers, even if they don't want to. So know what your budget is, know what you think you want to make. I always ask developers we work with, what does success look like for you? And it's really important. It does, and that might not be just pure numbers. It might be that you want to win a BAFTA. It might be that you want to just make enough money to make the next game. It might, there's personal factors, there's commercial factors, there's creative factors, all of which are really valid. But knowing what your goals are and understanding how this game is going to help you achieve them is really important for you as well as for the people you're going to work with. Because when we look to design a game, we want to know that we're going to be able to achieve what you want to achieve and vice versa. And I think any good funder would want that as well. So funding is a journey. So it takes time to raise funding. Unfortunately, it always takes a lot longer than you ever think possible to raise funding. And it's also a journey. So, you are very unlikely to start a company, have a game prototype, raise all the money you need to make that game, make the game, release it, and so on. In reality, what's probably going to happen, like a lot of you have experienced, is you've got some grant funding, then you get a bit more funding from a different source, and then you get a bit more, and so on. And so, building that into your pipeline and understanding what sorts of funding are suitable at what point and how that's going to take you on a journey is really important. And kind of thinking that through of what the possibilities might be at different points so that you can be prepared and so that you can kind of get ahead of it to give yourself time to raise the different funding is really important. Yeah, keep it simple. Pitch decks, particularly initial. Really what you're trying to do is two things. One is give the publisher or the funder or whoever you're pitching the basic information they need to know that this meets their criteria. So genre, platform, business model, etc. The basics. Secondly, make them think that this game is awesome. That's really it. And tell them what you need. But keeping it really simple, you can go into all the detail later. If they're interested, they're going to ask some more information. Somebody asked me earlier about how much detail, for example, to give on budget. And we discussed, that keep it really high level. Tell me how much you want. Tell me broadly what you're going to use it for. But I don't need to see at this point an entire breakdown. That's something that will come if I'm interested and if we're looking further. Know your market and audience. Actually, with this, a lot of you today really showed that you've really thought about this, which was great. But I think it's just really important to know your market and audience and know why this game should exist now. Every game has more than one audience for a start. So appealing to those, knowing what they're playing now and why they would play this game, and making sure that when I look at your game, I can see how you've tied the two together. So, okay, this is your market and audience. Oh, I see why this game is built in this way. And it's not just about the genre, it's also about mode of use, lifestyle fit. So, if you're appealing to an audience who play Candy Crush, then we know that they play for short periods and we know that they don't like to pay up front. So, how, making it on an iPhone, on a phone is going to be important for that audience and so on. So understanding where they're going to play, when they're going to play, and also how they like to pay is really important. If you're going to change the rules, that's okay, but you need to make sure that you've thought about and really understood the risks and the implications of doing that. Yeah. I go on a lot about data, and I appreciate that as I'm in the games as a service space, this is potentially more, but I actually don't believe that it's just about games as a service. Data is everything, because you should want to know that your audience likes your game as early as possible. And doesn't matter whether you are making a single playthrough narrative experience or a free-to-play mobile game. You should want to know that your audience player, and you should be doing everything you can to test that as early as possible and start making decisions based on what your audience want rather than what your game designer thinks is best. And I believe that applies to every game. And I believe that what games as a service, and even what hyper casual has taught us, whether we love it or hate it, is how we can do that really effectively and really quickly from day one. So I think it's really important to look at the lessons from those, even if you're in a different space, and think, how can I check that what I'm doing is what my audience wants? And if you can prove that through data, and data can be qualitative or quantitative, then you stand a much better chance of getting someone else to believe in it as well. And proving yourself. So, when you're a startup, you don't have any experience, it can be very challenging. If the team is experienced, that reduces the risk. If they're not experienced, then the reality is you're going to have to reduce the risk in another way. The most common way is to have to get the game further along and prove that the audience likes it more than somebody with experience would have to do. And that's just the reality. So thinking about your entire proposition, if you are weaker in one area in terms of experience, think about how you can mitigate it in another. Nobody looks at a proposition and says, oh, just because of the team, that's it. What they'll look at it is say, okay, we're weighing up all these different areas. What is the amount of risk involved here versus the potential upside? And so what your job is to do is to look at that truthfully and assess for yourselves where you present risk and where you can mitigate that risk. And if you can do that for yourselves and present that in the pitch, then you stand a lot better chance of preempting any of the concerns that a funder is going to have. Am I right for time? I'm nearly done. Pitch an opportunity, not a problem. So I think actually you all did a really good job of this today, by the way. So I feel like this isn't needed, but you want the person reading this to think, I don't want to miss out. That's your goal, right? They want to get this before somebody else does. And that's your challenge. So how do you make this an exciting opportunity? Not oh, we need money, but if you invest in this, this is going to be awesome for you. And I think you guys have done a really good job of this, but it's just something to think about in terms of how you pitch it when you talk to people and when you sort of present what it is you need as well as what you're offering. And don't expect to offset all the risk. As I said before, the reality of you having a concept idea, pitching it to a publisher and they fund it all is, it's a 1 in a million chance that will happen. The reality is that you need to share the risk. You will probably need to get the game to a certain point. And think about, how you can help to offset that risk and how you can, how can you get the game as far as you can, and how can you really help to work with the publisher to make sure that you're all kind of going in together. The reality is if you give away all the risk, you will give away all the reward. And you don't want to do that. So you want to think about how you can balance your risk and reward to then make it the same for the publisher. And that's it. So happy to answer any questions. But this link here is a finance list, which we have, which is free to access, which lists all of the finances that we're aware of. We try and keep it as up to date as possible. And it broadly breaks down, you can search by the sort of categories of finances that I've talked about today. So happy to answer any questions.
It's brilliant, Ella. Well done. Fantastic.
Thank you.
Good. Well, no questions by the look of it. That doesn't mean that there hasn't been a ton of information flying around there. What we're gonna do is don't anyone get too overwhelmed by the amount of information that's flying around today and tomorrow. As Ella said, all of you today, albeit in different ways, made good impressions on all of us. I think I can speak for others there. I think the presentations, some of them were outstanding, some of them were very good, some of them had plenty of potential. So I think we've, as a group, we're progressing really, really well. But don't get overwhelmed by this stuff. To have a successful career in games, unless you're extraordinarily talented and extraordinarily lucky, and you're all certainly talented, it does take time, and you've got to be in for the long term. So, let it grow. What we're going to do now is have a very short break. Rather than 30 minutes as per advertised, we're going to take a break for 5 minutes, and because that will allow us to get back on schedule. And I'm pretty certain Nick Dixon is in. Here he is very briefly. Nick's going to give us his wisdom and experience on how to pitch your game. So more around that, which would be brilliant. Nick hasn't seen your pitches from this morning, so that's probably even an advantage, who knows. That will allow us to get back on schedule, and at the end of today, when I'm rounding things up, we might even have a chance for a sort of like communal chat rather than me talking at you. We can talk together. So thank you very much. Let's break for 5 minutes. Specifically, come back at 14:37 if you're in the UK and 15:37 if you're in Norway, and we'll see you then. Yep.
kan litt humor i det.
Looking forward to this, Nick.
Good stuff, Andy.
Yeah, you're looking forward to it.
Let's hope I've done my homework.
You always do.
I do. This is true. It's true.
The shelves behind you are starting to get very impressive.
I'm just looking to compete with you, really.
No. There's no competition. I'm really wouldn't mind getting dug into those shelves. There's some serious stuff in there.
Well, the life-size waxwork of Nosferatu behind me terrifies another game developer friend of mine, Stu Main. He comes to visit every now and again, and what I'll do is I'll position him in various spots that are unexpected. And what I've said to him is that on my will, I'm leaving him the Nosferatu, but with the condition that it has to be there at his deathbed. Yeah, no, it's a long years of hard work and creative direction.
Love it.
Give me an excuse to have a cave like this.
Yeah, it's all good. How tall is Nosferatu? About 4'6"?
Yeah. I mean, he's not got any legs or arms, so he's a bit stymied in some ways. Eventually, I might complete the full the full model. Do you know what's most upsetting is that when I built this, I wanted to. My best model is a model of King Kong fighting a V-Rex, and it was a gift to me from Universal when I did some work with them. And I love this thing. It's a real collector piece. But the height between the top of the shelf and the ceiling is 64 centimeters, and Kong is 64.6 centimeters.
Oh,
and that's really upsetting. But hey ho, there we go.
You know the solution. Dig a hole in the floor.
Yeah, I mean, no, my partner will be happy if I just put a Kong-sized hole in the roof just for his head. But I'll have to get something specially constructed. It has to take the weight though. This is a massive, polystone statue.
Love it.
Yeah, very cool. Very good to be here with you. I'm sorry that I missed the pictures today. Academia has me at the wheel.
I can believe it. For the record, they were great pictures actually, and all very different. But some great game ideas and some great, really lovely, talented people.
Well, that part of the world evidences great companies and great creative minds, and so I look forward to seeing how you develop your titles into products that set people's imaginations on fire and gets the next generation of game makers into being. Yeah,
it's definitely going to happen. Right, we're on 1439, so I think it's probably time to, if you're okay with it, Sylvia and Dan, to ask Nick to let loose.
Okay, can everybody see my screen? Yeah, everybody see thumbs up if you can see my screen. Okay, great. Okay, so when I looked at pitching this, I adapted an existing session that I put together for a few people a little while ago. The first question is, well, what business do I have teaching anybody to pitch content? Well, for around 20 years or so, I was a creative director and game designer in industry, and my job primarily was to go out and pitch content. And there was a kind of heyday for reactive pitching for IP, and I did a lot of that. So a lot of movie-based pitching, Stargate, Star Wars, Doctor Who, that kind of stuff, and a lot of things landed very successfully. So apparently I can pitch okay. I am also a non-exec director on a number of indie companies because I've run an incubator now for a few years, and have recently migrated to running a full-time games incubator, which Andy is part of. So we see a lot of pitches coming through from those teams, and so being able to kind of advise those teams teaches us in turn. When I originally put together this presentation, I had a couple of slides on networking and pitching yourselves that I was going to throw out because that wasn't the title of the session. The title of the session was how to pitch your game, but I kept all the networking stuff in, and I thought I'd cover it at a top line because, frankly, every single thing you do when you're meeting people, whether it's in a formal meeting context when you're invited to their office to pitch content, or whether you are meeting someone at the bar of a game developer conference or develop or Nordic Games Summit or Cologne or wherever, you are formally pitching yourself. Whether you think you are or you're not, every single meeting you have with another industry person is a form of pitch. So I kept it in because I think it's important for you to understand that at all times in your career, whether you're representing yourself as an individual or you're representing your company in the promotion of content or a game or the chance to work together, you are pitching something. So it's important to understand in the context of pitching how to network. And of course, if you're pitching content, it doesn't always come about from a formal invitation to pitch at somebody's offices or online or whatever. It can come because you happen to meet the right person who you didn't know existed at one of these events. So it's important to know how you're going to pitch your content and yourself and your company, which is always one and the same thing at an event. So in terms of what I think are my top line key points of advice in terms of networking, well, I mean, ultimately, it is the ability to connect yourself and others you know into a wider network. And you'll all be doing that at some point. Some of you may be very natural at it. Some of you may have to work really, really hard at it. But the point is you'll always be working on developing how to network effectively. And you can get rusty at it. So it's important now that we're kind of slowly emerging from our COVID lockdowns to not just learn how to network effectively online, which if you can do effectively, you're doing something really, really well, to being able to do that in person. And usually the question is, am I networking myself? Am I networking for my studio? Well, you're always doing both. These things are not separate from each other. Your studio is you and you are your studio. So it's important to acknowledge that you're always professionally representing it. And in some of these instances, it can be very dangerous, right? Because you could be in an environment which involves alcohol. So you've got to moderate yourself and you've got to very carefully do that because you can often end up being remembered for all the wrong things when you're in that kind of context. The way that I look at this is someone came and said, you know, what should I do in this or that interview or you know, I said, I wouldn't assume that the conversation you and I are having at the bar is not an interview and that I will wait to put on my interviewee or interviewer hat when we get into a formal meeting. I remember every single conversation I have with somebody and they with me. And so, you know, it's important that you treat it very seriously and that every single conversation is treated very seriously at all times. Clearly, enthusiasm, motivation, and passion is absolutely key to everything that we do, right? We are selling passion. We're selling passionate adventures in the games and puzzles and everything else that we're promoting. And it's important that we represent that. But I think also that when you're tailoring your enthusiasm and motivation, that you're ultimately selling confidence, that you're selling confidence that they want to buy into. So part of that confidence comes from knowing your trade. And when Ella earlier talked about knowing the market, you know, this is all about that deep level data, whether it's design thinking about the design of your game, whether you know how to creatively, artistically direct your game, whether you know that there's an audience out there. The reason that we don't just speculatively sell games that we love because, well, we love them is because we want to have the confidence that that we understand our market and our audience and our artistic craft well enough that we can inspire confidence in those who are looking to buy from us. And that's ultimately what we're looking to do. Half the equation might be the title. The other half of the equation is you and the people making the title. And so it's important you demonstrate enough knowledge that you can get that confidence. And so this is where that motivation and enthusiasm balanced with knowing your trade comes in handy. And then ultimately it's about getting that trade flow back and forth, that conversation back and forth between you, that you understand what you're trying to get across, what is your strategy and what you're trying to get in return. And there's a couple of things I like here, which is ultimately that you're on a journey. When you start networking, there is a destination you want to reach. And often people can look at the astronaut and think, well, I want to be an astronaut and I just want to kind of, reach for the stars. But I mean, ultimately on your journey, there is a breadcrumb trail between, where you start thinking about wanting to be an astronaut, where you are in the rocket ship heading towards Mars. And that can include, being in the air cadets and then, joining the Air Force, learning how to fly and all the rest of it. And this is like that, right? Your journey between now and when you have a successful game pitched is understanding what are the strategic dots between your start of your journey and you end. And networking is the start of that process. And I've often found, a moment ago I said that Andy and I were doing some work together with others on some form of incubation. He's coming to help mentor and that kind of stuff. I mean, ultimately, I don't know everything. I don't know everything there is to know. I know an awful lot of people, but I don't know everything there is to know about the games industry, about who does what, who does where, about this subject, that subject. But I know an awful lot of people and they know. And so actually it's about broadening your network so that you can collaborate together and you can have the full picture with your partners that you collaborate with. So I also think that it's important to understand that nobody, when you start, knows who the heck you are. And it's okay. That's fine. That's important. But it is an industry where we do know each other. And actually, I used to joke that if I went to GDC and I walked the square mile between the conference center and the W bar, if I didn't bump into anybody that I knew, then it was time for me to leave the industry, that my day had been done. And I think that still applies. We're still an industry where you can't afford to be impolite or get recognized for having a bad reputation, because you do know everybody and they could end up being your employer, or they could end up working in the publisher that you want to get a game pitched into. But at the start, no one knows who you are. So you've got to really kind of think about your strategy for fostering the persona of yourself and your studio that you're looking to get across. Don't worry about being nervous. It may appear from this presentation that I don't easily get nervous at pitching stuff. I do. I'm still nervous about the lectures I give to students and will they like the content, and I get a bit of adrenaline when I'm going to pitch a title, but you can use that. This adrenaline is useful to you and you can use it to energize you. You just got to kind of work the best way for you to approach these situations. So what I would say is I would actually be more worried about someone who isn't nervous and who isn't cautious and who goes in all guns blazing than someone who is. So understand that if you're nervous, this is a good thing and that you can use this well, but be very careful if you just go in and you don't have any caution, because that can often put people in the wrong mind in terms of your approach. So everything you're doing is networking. I tell my students that they're working alongside their colleagues, their managers, their future business owners. And it's good to establish relationships even at this stage. You're networking with us. Now, you can get my contact details from Sylvia. You can send me questions. You can reach out to me. I am now immediately part of your network. So, take advantage of all of these sessions to build that network now and help you discover all of the hidden routes through, because I often find that it's not what is apparent which is the most valuable to you when you're networking. When you're networking, when you're pitching, it's often the side conversations that come out. I wasn't pitching Dead to Rights when I went on a visit to Namco with the Oliver brothers to talk about Pac-Man World 3. I wasn't even part of the meeting, but from that we got a £24 million deal for Dead to Rights Retribution. So you never know when the hidden options are going to become available. But if you network in the right way, then you're easily going to open up those opportunities. So in terms of pitching yourself, you've got to understand what your strategy is. What are you looking to achieve when you go in there? And I think even if you don't know immediately, take a moment to stop, think about what you'd like to achieve out of this, and then concentrate on achieving that. It's important that you don't take all of the conversation, you give other people air to speak. And actually, I would say that listening in networking is more important than talking. And something I need to think about, right? So I like to talk. So I have to very, very decidedly pinch myself and tell myself to shut up so I can actually let someone do some talking and listen, because they've probably got more value to offer than I have. Think about what information you want to get from them and think about what you want to receive. And then if you're not going to get it, then delay it, move it on till later. Often you'll find that it's enough to exchange a simple act of exchanging contact information, because usually some conversations can wait to a more appropriate time. But ultimately, you want to make sure that you are demonstrating that you are an authentic person with viewpoints that are of import to them at that particular time, and don't over worry trying to impress them more than being authentic. Okay. So on to pitching, which is probably what I should be talking about. So for me, there are two areas of pitching, right? There's reactive pitching and there's proactive pitching. And these days, reactive pitching tends to be more aligned to mobile content. We tend not to have a big tentpole AAA IP in the way that we used to, but it still does exist. There's a couple of Doctor Who games that came out recently. But reactive pitching is usually where someone comes to you and asks you to do a pitch for something. So all of these are pitches of mine from Stargate, Doctor Who, Star Wars, and Coraline. And even if we didn't end up making the game on all of these, we ended up with the rights to do it, with the agreement of the rights to do it. So I still consider those to be relatively successful, but we did publish a few games based on this content. But it is typically some form of intellectual property, whether it's a franchise, a gaming franchise, or a movie or television product, and they're usually asking you to pitch along with others. As I said, it's not as common these days, and you tend to see more of this on mobile than on console or PC platform. But this is competitive in nature, so you have to understand right at the outset that you're going in there to be competitive. And you can also, though, afford to speculate. So I remember at one of those GDCs, we bumped into MGM. MGN had Stargate, and I said I'd really like to pitch a Stargate game, and they said, well, why don't you come and pitch a Stargate game? And several months later, I'm in the MGM offices, surrounded by all their lovely Oscars, pitching Stargate, and we did get the opportunity to make the game for that. So that, these things can happen. So don't be afraid if you know someone is a license holder or they have the IP to pitch in the idea that you could make a game based on that IP, especially if you can breathe new life into something that's been around for a little while. I think you need to understand, though, that these things can be difficult because they have a shelf life. Arguably, when we did pitch in Stargate, they're around season 10 of the main show. That has some problems, right? Because there's always a kind of peak and a trough when it comes to television content. Even Doctor Who now is half as popular as when David Tennant was in the role and Matt Smith was in the role, which is sadly, a result of perhaps show running, but is ultimately, when you go from 5 million viewers, from 10 million viewers to 5 million viewers, you have to think about whether you can afford to make that content and whether the audience is there. So that applies. Also, you've got a purchase of the IP, which may have to come into it. So, if we got Doctor Who, for example, they might expect a minimum of guarantee of around 100,000 UK pounds. And then you've got to factor that into your costings when you're making the game. You've also got to agree terms with them around the minimum guarantee and any heads of agreement. So it always comes with legal considerations. It's never straight. There is money to pay to the IP holder. There is a relationship to have with the IP holder, which needs to be borne in mind. Most of you will be doing proactive pitching, and of course a large amount of indie development is based on your own ideas that you want to promote. And again, all of these are original IPs that we have pushed out, including the top one and the big black dog, which is from iDracula, that we pitched rather successfully to EA. They almost bought it on paper alone. Back in 2008, but original IP is really where people expect most independent development to be. So it tends to be more common because the largest portion of the market are still independent developers who are SMEs and fairly small indie-based companies. And for me, although you can get great value out of doing original IP and IP-based stuff, the real value in the studio is in original IP that you can create yourself, because that is where the value you can establish in your studio will be. So if you come to get investment in your studio in the end, then it will typically be based on the IP and the talent within the studio. So you need to make sure that you own it, that you're negotiating for the ownership over it. And for that matter, if you're going to put IP into publishers, it's got to match with them. There's no point in taking a horror game franchise to a sports game publisher, because that's not going to work. So this is where you have to be really strategic. When you're doing reactive pitching, your strategy is, how do I make the content that I'm pitching close to what the IP holder wants? Even if they don't yet know it, I have to convince them that it's it's a really good use of their IP. Whereas with proactive pitching, you have to fit with the strategy of the publisher in question, or the investor, or the platform, or all of those all at once. So in terms of the pitching top line, well, really, there are two questions that are needing to be answered, and that involves the applicability of the game to the audience and whether you yourselves can actually make the game, right? So these are the two primary questions overall that you're looking to answer. In terms of the pitch, it is ultimately a very, very quick elevator pitch vision for what makes your game unique. Now, I say unique in kind of cautious elements, because uniqueness is actually really, really hard to achieve, and true innovation and true uniqueness is incredibly difficult for companies to achieve, and most will at best achieve a unique twist on existing gameplay and therefore sit within an existing genre or commercial space of some kind, right? You know, Portal is still a unique twist on first-person shooters to a degree, in first-person puzzlers, but it is ultimately still part of the genre. So being truly unique is difficult. But if you do manage to create something unique, then that's great. But that may be even harder for you to sell, because publishers and funders typically like it to sit within a common framework that they understand, and they want you to establish a franchise as quickly as possible. But your job in pitching it is to make a very, very quick, clear case. And this is why we have an elevator pitch, and this is why that's important. Even a pitch document, if I have a 30-page pitch document, it's a beautiful A3 document full of lovely artwork that I put in, I always make sure that the first page is readable by the executives and can be fully understood and read in a very, very quick space of time, so they can then hand it on to other people who will take a more detailed look at it. But you want to understand and get across, what is it about your game that is the key selling points of the game, that is the game design pillars, that is the artistic pillars, and then you want them to understand what the moment-to-moment action is, so that ultimately you don't start your pitch with, it was a time of war and the kingdom of Nebula, they did all this, because afterwards someone will say, yeah, but what's the game? What am I actually doing? You want to start, and I'm a writer, right? I write stories for a living. I'm saying to you, start with the game, tell them what the basics of the game is, tell them what the genre is, tell them exactly what they're going to be doing moment to moment under those game pillars, and then you can say, and it's set within the kingdom of whatever. Now, I say be remembered. I think this is really important. Now, this does require some caution. So when I pitched that Dead to Rights game, the chap in charge of the studio at the time at Namco is a guy called John Whitmore, who since went on to Sega, and he's this huge American, right? He's 6 foot tall, 6 foot wide, and looks like he should be linebacking somewhere. And we just watched Bond, and we thought, well, what we want to do is we want hostage taking in the game, right? You should be able to take the shooter, turn them into a human shield, run and gun with them, and all the rest of it. And we were thinking about the James Bond scene when he was in the African embassy in Casino Royale. And so in front of the Japanese executives, I took John hostage and showed him how this was going to work. Now, they remembered that, and years later they said that they remembered that. I'm not sure that's always a tactic you want to do, but the point is that your pitch is about being memorable. You want to walk out of there, and a day later the executives still remember your pitch and remember that it was fun to listen to, engaging, that they understood what you're trying to get across, and that they have the desire to want to know more about it. Because as Ella said, when you're pitching finances, you're only going to want to give the top line, right? You're not going to want to go into a data spreadsheet. Well, the same is about your pitch and your design. You need to give them sufficient information that they understand what it is you're pitching and why that's special, but you don't want to fill them with so much detail that they're overwhelmed. They want to know more about what you're doing. So what are the key hooks of the game? What are the pillars? What are the things that make it different? And then think about how you sell it. Whilst we can easily sell existing orientations on existing genres, you don't want to just sell it as, well, it's this game plus this. Their marketing team might want to encapsulate it in that way. They might want to understand in that way, oh, it's, you know, it's Tomb Raider with kites. But that's not ultimately the way you want to sell it. You may want them to extrapolate some of that information, but you need to think about how you're selling it, and you're not just selling a clone. It might be easy to sell that, but they still have to draw audience away from what you're doing from what other players are playing to what you're looking to sell. Ella's also right in the sense that if there is no track record, it's incredibly hard. And this is ultimately what you as new teams face, is that you've not published anything before. And so that's really, really difficult. Now, in incubation, what I try and do is I try and get teams to a publishable status. And I do that because what you have to understand is the games business is not about making games. right? And that may seem like a contentious thing to say. Of course it is. Of course it's about making games and entertaining people, but the games business is about making games companies that make games. And that's what you need to understand, is that you're actually, first and foremost, having to inspire confidence in those who are funding you or publishing you, that you are going to do good things with the money that they put your way, that you're able to turn this beautiful vision of what you're creating into something that is going to be made on time, on budget, and is going to do the things it needs to do. And so actually, when people are investing in you, which a publishing deal is, as well as private investment, they're investing in the team as much as they're investing in the product. And so actually, you need to inspire confidence in yourself as a team first and foremost, which is why you need to understand that a pitch is not a creative pitch. It is a business pitch with creative aspects. And so it's really important that you understand that. Now, actually, I don't have any documents here. I can send Sylvia some examples of pitch documents I've done in the past, but normally I would have these big A3 pitch documents. But that's because when I first started pitching at Blitz Games, they would literally send out grubby Word documents that had fingerprints all over them and look like they've been written in 5 minutes. Actually, if you don't have the time to create a full vertical slice, and I agree that I hate that term as well, but if you don't have time to do that, you have to demonstrate that you're able to put as much passion and love. If you put that into the pitch, then what are you going to put into the game? So we produced these beautiful documents. The one we did for Star Wars had a metal cover with laser brushed writing, writing on it, and it was absolutely gorgeous. And those are big documents, but you need to make them a piece of art that they can understand, that they want to read, they want to digest, but ultimately don't shove a great big Bible under their hands and expect them to read it, because they won't. I like the analogy with dating, and I think you need to understand that, there's no way you'd start dating someone and decide, or you shouldn't do, and decide to spend the next 3 hours giving them your entire life history as a reason for why they might want to date you. You need to start off small and introduce things as you go and produce snippets. So do think of pitching like dating. Okay. As I said, these are the two key questions. If you take away nothing else from this discussion, it's just this. These are the questions they want to answer. Is the game worth making? Is there a market for the game? Are there people who are going to want to buy the game and play it? So that is where your market research comes in handy, right? That it is impossible in some ways to accurately, fully research the market to the degree where you have full confidence that absolutely everybody is going to buy your game. You honestly can't know that. And you will go to 8 different sources that will tell you 8 different things about what the market says. If you actually go on to UK stats for game sales, and then you go on to Nestor stats for game sales, they'll tell you 2 different figures for how many $1 billion the games industry has made in the UK. And no one wants you to say, well, if this game sold 1 million units, I sell 1% of that, then we'll make X amount. Ultimately, the only figure that matters is break even, because anything beyond that is various degrees of good, and anything less than that is various degrees of poop. But in terms of is the game worth making, you need to do sufficient research that's deep and wide, so you can say with some confidence, if you can take me away from 30% confidence that there is an audience for your game to a 60% confidence that someone is going to want to buy your game, then that may be good enough. But that is what that's about. Is the game worth making is not necessarily about the idea, it's about the market for the idea. And then the other question is, can this team make the game? They want to know that you have the abilities, and the T-shaped abilities, and the team working abilities, and the communication abilities, as well as the motivation to actually finish making the game and do your best to bring it in time under budget. And that's why that budget is really important, because they're going to calculate at a very early stage how much it's going to cost them per month if you break that contract. And that usually means various bad things for you. So it's really important that you get those elements right, you get the business elements right, you get the communication aspects right, that you can sell that you are a good team. So as I said, make sure that you're entertaining enough that you remember that they remember the pitch and what you said and why you said it. You can be enthusiastic, but also do be honest. If you don't know something and they ask you a question, say, look, I don't know, I'll go away and I'll think about it, and then I'll come back with an answer. No one's going to shoot you down for that, but they'll always remember when you bullshitted your way through an answer, and they did, it was really clear, because usually they will have a bit more experience than you will. They'll be able to tell straight away if someone is trying to missell them something and they know better. And when it comes to your costings and things like that, I would would rather overprice and negotiate down than underprice. Usually for me, if a team is under costing something, that's usually a bigger cause for concern for me when someone's pitching than if they overprice, because I can negotiate down. You never know, the publisher might actually give you what you're looking for. Okay, so when you're looking at the pitch deck, again, there's only going to be a point where you can control that pitch, right? You're going to walk out of the room and they're going to be left with the materials you left them. So make sure that the pitch answers all the key questions that you need to, and try and write the pitch in a way that you've still got room to maneuver when inevitable changes in your game occur. I always make sure that my front page has a very, very clear executive summary so that the executives who will only read a short amount can read it, walk away and hand it over to somebody else. But make sure all of your key selling points, unique selling points, your platforms, your delivery times, they're all there front and center so people can read those. We had some of the best concept artists working with us. Now, you may not have access to that, but try and get the pitch document working for you from a sales point of view, right? So that people are understanding that when we did the Star Wars pitch, right, and I knew that I had to do the art demo, well, what art demo would I show? I can't show space battles and Jedi battles and all the rest of it in my art demo. So in the end, we had Yoda on a dais meditating, because that was really simple and we could get across the artistic expression for the IP. And we left all of the concept art to the books. We showed all the space battles, all the lightsaber battles, everything else in the pitch document. So it's a really good way to express yourself artistically through the pitch and making it interesting for them to look at. Actually, when I'm pitching content, I tend to have, unlike this presentation, very few words on the screen. The most important thing they're doing is they're listening to you, watching you, and picking up information. So you don't just repeat what's on the slide, but often I would just have an image and I would talk over the image about what this moment of gameplay means. You need to be really clear when you're talking to a publisher or funder what you're asking for. Have a very, very clear ask. I'm looking for this much for this length of time in order to do this. I require QA. I require localization. I require dev kits, so they can estimate exactly what you're looking for. Be really clear what you're asking for in terms of the amount of time, and add contingency. Generally, I tell all my teams to add 25% contingency to every line on the budget, because I think it's important and you will eat into it. I don't start with the company. I don't start with the team. I tend to, when I'm pitching stuff, I tend to start with the project and then I end with the team, but it doesn't matter. But make sure that you do demonstrate what your experience is. And as I said, if you have that market research data and the sales data in there, break even is the most important thing, and it's the only realistic thing that you could be advertising. It's Imra that taught me that, and I think that is a very, very important point. So after the pitch, it's really important that you say what you're going to do, right? So if you said, we're going to follow up with this material, follow it up and send that material. I don't tend to hassle people. I tend to wait 2 weeks and then I send a follow-up email, and then I wait another 2 weeks and I send another follow-up email. If I don't hear after those 2 follow-up emails, I let it go. A, because I have my own pride to consider, but also if they're not getting back, there could be a million reasons that have nothing to do with you that have not got back to you, but they're not getting back to you, so let it go. And it's important that you don't hassle, because if you hassle, that sets a worse, I think a worse thought in their mind in terms of reacting to you. But if you said you're going to follow up, then do follow up. And I would always follow up something, even if it's a thank you email. But if you're going to present material, or you're going to send them a link, or you're going to send them other data, then make sure you do that. If they do give you feedback, do really think about what they're saying and why they're saying it. That's really, really important. And it's important that you respond to it. And it's important that you critically reflect, and you reflect on why they're saying it. Now, sometimes you have to disseminate why a publisher is saying something, right? So when we're making data rights, the publisher said, and Imra will nod to this, they said, we want a rocket pack on the dog. And we're thinking, why do you want a rocket pack on the dog? They didn't want a rocket pack on the dog. They just wanted the dog to go faster. So sometimes you have to translate what they really want and really understand, but have a good think about why they're giving you that feedback, and consider it very, very seriously, and make sure you respond to it. Because ultimately, like J.K. Rowling, who only got one response from a publisher before they published a book, you only need the one. The one's all you need. So make sure you think about who is the right publisher for you, but you only need the one. So just work hard at getting that one response. Okay, this is a horrible image, and I found this image as a joke because this is probably the worst thing I'd ever seen about man grooming. I think it just makes me feel a bit ill inside. But anyway, it amused me. But ultimately, everything is about leaving that impression, and it is the impression about why they should take your game, why they should make your game, why there is a market for your game, and why you're the team to make it. And this is what you want to do, and you want to sell that in 20 minutes. You have 20 minutes, right? When I do a presentation and they put in a lecture for me for an hour, I know that the students are only going to remember 20 minutes of what I tell them in that hour. So you need to make sure you get your most salient points out in that 20 minutes. But you've got 20 minutes, which is usually five slides, five or so slides, 2 or 3 minutes a slide, and that's it. And you need to make sure you leave an impression in that time. But ultimately, you're not alone. We all go through this. We all get nervous about it. I'm pretty sure that, myself, Imra, and others still get nervous before we do a big pitch because a lot is riding on it. And that's okay. It's a completely natural. And once you get into it, usually the adrenaline will take you past that. So you'll be fine. If you have to rely on notes, rely on notes. That, your own natural way to present is your way to do it. The most important thing is you demonstrate passion along the way. Okay, so here are the things I would like you to take away from the talk today, that ultimately everything you do is about networking, whether you're pitching at the bar or you're pitching in somebody's office, it's networking, and it's absolutely integral to whatever you do. And if you lead a company, if you're running a company, you're going to be doing it a lot of the time. So you're always pitching. You're pitching yourself, you're pitching your studio, but it's pitching all of the time. It's the same difference. It doesn't make, it's maybe different subjects, but it's the same activity. And every single conversation you have is an interview, is a pitch, is networking. And never forget that you're pitching something important, yourself, your studio, your game. So never let drink get in the way of having a good conversation at one of these events. They are professional events, even if some people seem to be having an unprofessional time. Make sure that you use your ears more than your mouth, because your ears will be of better service to you than your mouth. And then if you listen, what you say will often make more sense. But make sure you have a strategy before you go into the pitch. Make sure you do follow up on the pitch, and then just remember these 2 questions, right? Is the game worth making? And can your team make this game? You answer those 2 questions well for a publisher, you usually get invited back for a second discussion, or you will warrant deeper investigation into what do you have to offer. And that's it. Thanks very much indeed. There's my email at the bottom. I've probably gone over time, but if anybody has any questions, Sylvia, I'm more than happy for them to email me. That's no problem.
Great talk, Nick. Thank you. Really, really good. Tons in there. Lots of things that clearly I'm laughing at, because smiling and eyes and hair, and all that stuff. My best days are over for pitching. I've never been much good at that because it's just like dating. Okay, I really appreciate it on behalf of everybody else. Thanks for giving up. I know you really pressed on time and didn't realise when you agreed to do this, we twisted your arm, that you would be so busy. But it's packed full of great information. Has anybody got any questions for Nick before we? I'm
more than happy to take some questions if you have time. It was my absolute pleasure. You can't cover off pitching in half an hour. And so if you do have any questions, please feel free. I'm always happy to set up a little meeting in the evening online if needed. So it's not a problem. The main thing is that people remember what you're trying to pitch, and you're pitching it for the right reasons, because there's a market. If you know there's a market, then you know that there's going to be someone who can buy it. You want to have the confidence that you don't just want to rely on your idea because you love it. Typically, I find that you may love it, but you need to make sure that 8 out of 10 other people will love it more than you do. So it's important you get that right, and that you're ultimately pitching the business. As I said, the games industry is not about making games, it's about making games companies that make games.
Yeah,
that's the key
difference.
Very,
very good point. And I think that, the point about networking, building the network, your own network up, is really important. It takes time, but it also takes effort, and stuff will not come to any of us. Stuff just doesn't arrive by accident. You've got to go out there and put yourself in the position that you can at least maximize your chances of success. Really is what it's all about. And
yeah,
it probably doesn't come naturally to anyone. I could, just 1 second and I'll be with you. Anyone. It doesn't come natural to creative people, but we're far too busy far too sort of focused on what we want to create rather than what we want to talk about. But we do have to deal with that. Apologies, Ragnar.
Thank you. I have one question. This is perhaps just because I need some advice. I've been invited to present the project that we finished and sort of what is finished, and we're not going to continue too much on it. To one of the how do you say? Well, it's one of the funds, but it's a private fund, and they tend to give to social causes. And the project that we've done is about. Oh, no, that's not mine.
That's me. Sorry.
So I've been invited to come and present a finished project that we've done to them for lunch, as sort of lunch entertainment, and they've been really nice and supported the project. But sort of precisely when we needed it, they came with the funds that we needed to get it done.
Yep.
And now I'm sort of invited in to present it and say, so this is what we do. And so they've invited me to present the past projects, and I'm sort of hoping that maybe I can sneak in some way the new project that we have. Do you have some, I've been invited to talk about one thing, but how do I so I'll be doing sort of a talk about that, but how do I sneak in a nice way? Oh, by the way, do you know we have this new project about,
Well, I think if they funded you, they've also funded your future to a degree, and it's important to understand how the past stuff you've done has applied to the future. I think it's important to know who's in the room and what would be the value of for you to them to kind of pitch this. But I think there's no harm in presenting, this is what we've done, but actually this is where it's led to. We're just about, working on this now. This is a very exciting project for us. And if any of you would like to discuss this further, then I will be over here afterwards to follow up with you. I don't think there's any harm in that at all. I don't think pitches need to exclusively just be about that thing. You just obviously can't do 10 slides on it and make it of equal weight to what's come before. But I think there's a good way of doing that. I mean, ultimately, every project should be able to achieve interest in an elevator pitch alone. And if it doesn't, I would always say that you need to re-communicate the idea until you get it into that format. And that seems a bit counterproductive to some people who think, well, I can't possibly communicate my idea in 2 minutes. But I think if you can't, then there's probably something wrong with it that you need to kind of rethink. So I would maybe get, one or two slides to talk about the future. I'd phrase it as the future, and I'd phrase it as to where their funding has helped you and what it's helped you achieve. Use that to pitch in the last minute or two, and then make sure that you have follow-up conversations with people afterwards, because it's probably important that you get to one side with those people once you're done, have breakout conversation and be able to talk it in more depth, and then say, I would actually really like to come back and talk to the fund again about this if that's important. So that's probably how I do it. I mean, I don't tend to, usually when I'm kind of suddenly pitching with something they didn't expect, is because an opportunity has occurred in a meeting that I didn't anticipate. And I usually have a Rolodex in my head. Like, I think every kind of pitcher has a Rolodex in their head going any one time, and I can flip and I can flip through and then penceive out the thing I need immediately, and then as if by magic go, ta-da, here's the answer you were looking for. And to that point, the reason why all this is important is not just because I love filling my space with funky models. I remember a conversation with a studio once. They said, you do all this creative direction. We should teach you how to be a producer as well, how to do production. I said, that is not me. I said, that is not me. I said, it is enough that I know every single variety of stormtrooper rifle in the Star Wars universe, just in case Star Wars come and ask me to do a pitch. Because what you want is you want someone to enthusiastically leap up and go, aha, I can do this with the Star Wars game if you really like. And that's what this is about, is creatively, I find really good pitchers understand their creative medium to a very, very detailed degree. And they can, on a very quick turnaround, answer questions very, very quickly because they've got this almost encyclopedic knowledge. And that's why actually in those pitches that they'd always have a business person with me as well, Steve Bruce, because he'd take the notes and he'd remember, because frankly, when I entered a pitch 15 minutes later, I couldn't tell you what I'd said. I just enter a kind of zone and pitch away. And it's important that you've got somebody else who can remember what the heck you promised you would do. But yeah, I'd kind of slip it in towards the end and maybe do a 1 or 2 minute piece on it and then break away afterwards, if that's useful.
Yeah, thank you.
Cool.
I'm listening. I just have to boil spaghetti at the same time. My kids are coming back home, but I'm listening to everything.
Oh, see, now I want spaghetti. Cool. Any other questions from anybody else? No? Okay. Great. Thanks, Andy. Thanks very much. Sylvia, thank you so much for inviting me. I really appreciate it. I now have to go back to that academic work to get my modules sorted, but it's been a real pleasure. And I'm so sorry I missed the pitches. I will be watching. If there are recordings later, I'd love to look through them. So thank you very much, Dee, for inviting me along. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Good. Okay, so we've got one more formal session to do, which is my very dear friend and confidant, who I'm now not going to pronounce his name because I'll get it wrong, of course, Mr. Jella. Are we good to go straight into that? Is everyone comfortable? Yeah? Good. Okay. Over to you, dear friend.
So Nick's presentation said that the first impression is, what was that? Smile? What was eyes? Those are hands. Now it also says hair. So I think I'm in trouble there. But there you go. I can't make first impressions. Good ones at least now. Hello everyone. I think I've spoke with most all of you earlier, but we didn't really have time for introductions beyond what we had at the very beginning of the day. But before I go to that, I just want to say that I strongly urge you to be very grateful for this event to exist. Most countries and regions do not have these sort of things, and this is fantastic. And I hope that you as a community step up and help each other this way, because this makes a huge difference. You know, in the UK we have UKI and BAFTA, and you know, we have some representation, and even that is not enough. So the fact that you have this event is fantastic, and I think you should try to get as much as you can out of this, especially, you know, a country of only 5 million people. You have a small community, you can get a very tightly knit community, and you should absolutely put in effort into that, because I guarantee you get more out of it than what you put in. And also in the morning, Andy mentioned that we're experts, and I don't know about that. I think the more experience I get, the less confident I am about my own knowledge. We can definitely give perspectives, and Nick and Ella and others, that's what we can offer, right? We offer a different way that you could look at things. At the very least, we can offer you questions that you can ask yourselves, even if you don't like our answers. And that's what I encourage you to do with what I'm about to talk as well. So my name is Imre Jelle. I been making games my whole life, and I've been probably most known for but the biggest impact I achieved was through Bossa Studios, which I co-founded with a few friends, and we made some pretty good games and some pretty bad ones. Probably we are most known for our physical comedy game like Surgeon Simulator, Iron Bread, Iron Fish, now Surgeon 2. And at Bossa Studios, we are most known for our creativity. Like, people come to us and ask, what do we put in the water? Like where these crazy ideas come from. A game where you play the role of a slice of bread who wants to get toasted. Like that, come on, that is just insane on the face of it. And and that comes from distributed creativity. What we describe is that everyone in the company has a contribution to it, and we leave a lot of platform for everyone in the company to contribute, but our players as well to contribute to that. And a big part of that is prototyping, and that's what I'd like to talk about, because I think it's quite important for your pitching process. So the first question is, I think that you have to ask, and it's quite a trivial one, but you have to ask with this one, is that why to make a prototype to begin with? And there are many reasons. Discovering new gameplay ideas, even before you know what game you want to make, just jamming is a very early version of prototyping. Exploring technical risks and challenges. Some of prototypes could be about trying to prove that something is technically possible, or at least that you can fix that technical challenge. Of course, it is to test game design assumptions. It is to better define your game for your own team, to orient and motivate them. It is to get feedback from players. And of course, it is to convince financiers and publishers, and many, many other goals. It's crucially important that you understand what that goal is, because a prototype is not just a singular thing. A prototype could be anything. And I've seen oftentimes that people don't understand why they need to make a prototype, if they need to make a prototype, and if they do, what should be in the prototype. And in the context of pitching to a publisher in particular, that's important. Now, I am going to talk about two things in a bit more detail, and I know that we have somewhat limited amount of time, so I'm going to try to go through this talk as fast as I can, and then open some time for questions as well in the end. But there are two areas which I would like to talk a little bit more about. The first one is about how to use prototyping and why prototyping is important as part of the game design process, and then why prototyping is important for publishers. Now, the game design process is, the way I see it is that, and this is just my personal professional view, is that the game design process goes through these stages of heart design, brain design, and hands design. And by heart, I mean you understanding the emotional hooks, the motivations, the why would the players want to play this game. And it's quite important that you understand those drives. And I'm not just talking about the cores of your storyline and the motivational drivers of your universe, but I meant very specifically gameplay motivators, what drives your players forward, and why you as a creator, you want to make it, and there's always a touchy-feely part. Then afterwards comes the brain design. That's when you start breaking it down, those bigger objectives into systems and features and pieces of content and mechanics and all that. That's when you are doing, writing yourself big documents and make spreadsheets and all that. But inevitably, you have to get to the hands design, where you actually have to play the game, because more often than not, there is going to be a huge difference between what's in your head and what is the game actually feels like when you're actually playing it. And in one of the feedback sessions, I mentioned to the team that there is a huge margin error between what's in your head, what's in your pitch document, and then what's in the heads of the people who read that pitch document or even listen to your presentation. There is a huge variability there, and it's hard to manage. The only way you could do that is that you break everything down to infinitely simplistic building blocks, but that is like explaining to your grandma who never played a video game your video game idea, and this takes too much time. So you want to find shorthands. And one great shorthand is a playable prototype, So it's not only it's a for publishers, but also for you, it explains what the game is. Again, because it is a skill to develop, to be able to play a game in your head and be realistic, because your mind in your head fills in the gaps. Oftentimes you have an idea in your head and you think there is a bit of a fluffy bit, and that's going to be really good. But actually, no, that's where your game is going to fall down. So when you build a prototype, it makes you better understand your game. It makes you answer those tough questions and just helps you to better understand the game, therefore better communicate the game. Now, when you prototype for game design purposes, you have many different ways to do it. We do a lot of game jams at Posta Studios, and a lot of prototypes. And for us, these are two different things. We call them gemlets, anything which comes out of a game jam, and then anything which got a couple of weeks to a few weeks of development, they became prototypes. And then there was another version which has a few months behind it, and all of those fulfill different purposes. The reason that is helpful, because all of these jams and prototypes and longer prototypes, or even MVPs, they are a microcosm of your development environment, and they really test your entire pipeline. And I'm going to come back to this again. Beyond you understanding the game better, your prototyping, your internal prototyping also makes you understand your studio better and your own skills better, which is going to be crucial when you're pitching. And that leads me to the next part, which is prototyping for publishers. I think you have to have a less romantic view of prototyping. I think often people look at it that these stories that someone was at a game jam and they made a prototype and it caught the attention of a publisher, and I threw a bunch of money at them, and then they became, this hugely successful development. Sure, that story exists. That kind of rags to riches, it's really cool and it exists. But statistically, it's unlikely to be you. The more likely story that you are going to experience, or any one person is going to experience, is grind, right? That you're working through this bit by bit by bit and building up, and you fall back down and you build it back up again, and it's just hard work, right? Very rare that these kind of shortcuts appear. And so when it comes to prototypes, don't look at it that way. It's not this kind of romantic story that two people catch each other's eyes across the room and then suddenly they're destined to be together. That's not your relationship is going to be with a publisher. And so you have to understand them as a business partner. And so when you are prototyping for a publisher, you need to understand what their goals are and what they want and what they need. It's very, very different from prototyping for game design. And a lot of things that you've done for prototyping internally for your own reason, that it be game design, technical, whatever reason, that's all super useful for prototyping for publishers, but it's not enough on its own. Just having a cool prototype which shows off your idea is not enough. You have to look at this, that this is a business to business sales exercise. And I know that we as creators don't like it, because we're just like, I'm an artist and I'm doing art. And we don't like it. We don't like this idea, but it is a business relationship, and you must not ever forget that. So with that comes that you need to understand what your job is, and your job is to understand the publisher, understand what you need to do to convince them that you are the partner that they want to spend money and time with. And for them, you can argue that doesn't matter if they care about games or not. It's an investment. They are investing their time and money, and they want to make sure that it's the right investment. And even if someone only cares about the art, still they are investing their time and money, and they want to make sure that they get something out on the other end. So you have to manage their disbelief. You have to assume that when you go into a meeting, that they don't believe your game should be supported. I'm not saying expect a hostile meeting. That's not the point. The point is that you have to build it up from the point that someone who does not want to support you yet, and to the point where they want to support, and a prototype is a great way to alleviate those fears. Now, as it was mentioned earlier, I think others said it as well, that everyone is different. Every person, every publishing company, every financier, every investor, everyone is different. They have their corporate and personal preferences, and so they are going they're going to be very different on what they expect. There are certain publishers who look for certain types of games because that's what they need, or they just changed recently their minds and now they're looking for a different type of scope or direction. So there is no one size fits all. To be honest with you, you just have to go out with your game and hopefully understand publishers and target the right publishers with the right messaging. But ultimately, you don't know. It could have been that a publisher changed their mind since last week, and now your game is a good fit, which could not have been a good fit a month ago, right? So there is no shortcuts here. There is no template which is going to guarantee that your prototype is going to work with the publisher. But fundamentally, I found that there are two truths that is pretty much universal, to is generic enough, is what the publishers are going to look for to get out of the conversation with you and get out of by looking at your prototype. And one thing is that, what is the game? That's the one to be answered. And secondly, can you make that game? And that is quite important. Now, as far as the what is the game goes, they want to know what it is, right? The pitch, as I mentioned earlier, can never do a complete job. In fact, often it can be very misleading. I often review pitch documents, and I can tell you that the vast majority of pitch what I read has a lot of missing content. Very recently, I've seen a pitch from an experienced team who forgot to mention what the genre of the game until 6 slides in, right? And this is coming from an experienced team. And vice versa, the number of times I read about how innovative something is, or captivating, or how long-term game, like, why? It's just filler words, like, don't mean anything. And so pitch is never gonna do a full job, never gonna be able to match what a prototype can. So a prototype can help the publisher to understand what the game is. But they also, beyond the fact that they want to know what the game is, seeing a prototype also helps the publishers understand that you know what the game is. And I feel like this is often forgotten. Once again, I've seen pitches where with 2-3 easy questions, we could figure out that the team did not actually understand their own game, which sounds really harsh. But I think you have to look at your own work and your own pitch document and have to say that if someone comes in with some harsher pointed questions, can you really answer them? You know, can you answer how you are differing from your closest competition? Can you answer why would someone play this game over another similar game? Why would I continue to play after an hour or two? Why would I stick to it? Why would I want to tell it with my friends? It's like a prototype really proves that you understand your own game because you put that on the screen. You know, it's not just some words on a page. You actually created it, and publishers know that process of going through that process proves that you understand your game, or at least you already discovered in the process of making it. Now, publishers also want to know how can they explain the game to players, and a pitch document is really helpful in that. Because there are certain wording or certain phrases or imagery that they already have in a pitch document, and publisher absolutely will look at that. They absolutely will consider, can I communicate this to my players? Can I make them excited about it? And once again, a prototype is a great way to do that. It's so much easier for the publishers or the marketing department look at the playable and they can say, I can visualize the trailer. I can see how it's going to look. I know what I'm going to put in the trailer. I know what I'm going to look at what I'm going to put on the posters in the trade shows. It just helps them when it moves on the screen and they can interact with the game. That's just help them better understand how the players are going to experience that product and therefore how they can sell it to them. Ultimately, they want to know what the game is because they want to know if they can make a lot of money out of it. You know, and it's just your goal as well, right? If you make money, you can make more games. How cool is that? So a prototype goes an extremely long way in that to explaining what a game is. And again, this is this classic exercise that if you give your elevator pitch or even a full pitch document to someone, different people, and then you ask them to explain the game back to you, I promise you that different people will come back with different versions of the game. And that's very dangerous for you because it very well could be that they're missing an important point about how does the game feel, especially when you are in either direction you go. If you are doing a completely innovative game, they're not going to understand what the game plays until they can play it. Again, I Am Bread is a great example. If I tell someone that you're playing as a slice of bread and want to get toasted, you're like, well, okay, I don't know what that is. Like, I don't understand how you play. It doesn't make any sense. If I explain it in a pitch document, I can never explain how you move a bread around, a slice of bread. You need that prototype to be able to show that. And equally, if you are pitching a game which is similar to others, but it's just better in presentation or scope, or it has like a nice little twist, then they really want to see your ability for presentation and polish. Because when you are close to other games, that's your advantage. You have to be just so much better in your implementation than the other similar games. And why would they believe you that you can do that? You have to be able to put that on the screen, and then they can believe you. So, and that leads to the next thing, is what I mentioned, that they want to know what the game is, and secondly, they want to know if you can make it. I already covered this a little bit earlier, but making it move on the screen is a great first step, and is better than most CVs. Even if your team comes with a great experience, it's sometimes not enough to convince a publisher that you can make the game. Now, don't get me wrong. If you're coming in with successful delivery of very similar games, that could be enough. But in most cases, people are not going to believe it, that you have the ability to do it. And the reason that is important, and because if I tell you that I'm going to make a game about a mildly racist depiction of an Italian plumber who likes mushrooms, you are going to send me away, and rightfully so. If I show you, Mario, and at the time being, the market leading, a whole new genre experience and done to perfection, then you're going to be interested as a publisher. So that's the difference here. It's very easy to say something is going to be innovative or addictive or whatever is the latest buzzword. It's so easy to put it in a pitch document. It's a whole another league. But can you actually make it? I have this view that most ideas, even many bad ones, can be turned into a good game, some even a great game. Simply because implementation matters more than the idea. Amazing ideas have been and will continue to be butchered by bad implementation. So from a publisher point of view, when they see your demo, see your prototype, it gives them a great amount of confidence that you have the ability to do what you're promising. Again, ideas are great, but the implementation is the real deal, because that's when it becomes a marketable and sellable product. So a surprising idea might be proven great when you can actually play it. And my company, our company at Bossa Studios, we have experience with that. And some of these ideas would look just plain silly on paper. And when you actually play them, you realize that they're good fun. So when you talk to a publisher, again, you need to understand what their motivations are, and you need to understand what they're trying to achieve. Explaining what is the game, a prototype can go a long way to give you a lot of, to save you a lot of explanation needed. And also, it can prove them that you have the ability to deliver, which is, again, very important. I'm sure that every publisher, as I said, have different requirements. And if you can figure out what those requirements are, then you can adjust your prototype accordingly. But just these two reasons, I think there's more than enough to justify you spending the time and money to create a prototype. Now, a question which often comes both with game jams and bigger prototypes and even almost like ready to launch MVPs, doesn't matter what scope you're talking, is that what should be in there. And it really depends, again, on the purpose that I mentioned before. If you're doing it for internal development purposes, then you might want to focus on the hardest challenges or the most unknown things, because you're proving it to yourself, right? Imagine if you're self-funding a project, you want to know if you can do the hardest bit. Because if you can do that, then everything else you can do from there onwards, right? But that's not necessarily the same for a publisher. And this is, again, what I mentioned earlier, that you need to understand that if you're creating a prototype for a publisher, it's likely going to be different from what you would build for yourself. For a publisher, you might want to focus showcasing on what you already know and what you have the ability to do. I've made decisions in the past with prototypes, frankly, where I very deliberately avoided the elephant in the room, because I just did not. I knew we can solve the problem, but I also knew it's going to take us a year. And for the prototype, we just ignored. We just pretended that problem is not there. And when the publisher asked, we had the answer that this is how we're going to figure it out. So again, an internal showcase, sorry, an internal development prototype is going to look very different and going to have very different content than what you put in front of a publisher. It is a sales pitch, right? So my suggestions are as follows. First of all, gameplay. I believe that in gameplay, it is important that you try to demonstrate to the best of your abilities the various gameplay loops of second to second, minute to minute, hour to hour, meta loops and long-term retention mechanics, or whatever is the terminology in the genre you are developing. And I know it's different. And so what you find that obviously you can't develop every piece of content and you can't develop every piece of mechanic, especially when you're working in systemic games. It can be very difficult because oftentimes the game would need, from the 10 major systems, need at least 6-7 of them present to be able to really get a feel of the game. But you have to be able to cut out the right parts. I've seen and I've done prototypes where we broke the fourth wall, and we literally added a button with a function, and it opened up a screen which explained how the function is going to work, but we didn't implement it. Or we picked an idealized version and we said, this is the outcome. For example, there was a level up or a skill-based system in the game. We didn't develop that. We just simply said, you leveled up, your character picked these skills, and we showed the skill tree, but we knew that 95% of the skill tree is not in the game, but we pretended it's there, and the game said, oh, you can only buy these. Or we deliberately made the skills, all of the other skills, so expensive that you can't afford them. So when you were playing the prototype, you chose the skills, but we had time to build. So you can maneuver players on the publishing side, the testers, you can maneuver them in the direction. And sometimes just admit it, say, in this prototype, we don't have this present, this is how it's going to be. I think the biggest break I've seen was where there was a video file when you got to a certain part of the gameplay, and the developer literally just narrated and says, well, in this part, this is what's going to happen. It's going to be flying in and it just explodes, and it's like really cool scene. And then obviously didn't have budget to do that. And it was weird, but at the same time, I got it. I got what was happening there. I knew what scene is going to be, now why that was important in the gameplay. So it's okay to put in placeholders. I've seen prototypes done where they did individual systems independently. So they demonstrated certain mechanics in different levels or even different executables. That certainly has a role. And I'm sure that there's some publishers who love that. It is my experience that when you are pitching, it's a sales pitch. That might not be the best way. I think that when you're using prototyping as a sales tool, what you'll find that doing it, creating an experience which is representative of the overall flow of the gameplay is better rather than demonstrating individual mechanics separately. But I do get it that sometimes it's not possible. But as much as you can, try to recreate the flow and how it feels to play the game. Because again, that's what the publishers want. I would not be surprised if you go in with a demo like that, which is more a technical demo, and the publisher is going to say, this is really cool, come back to me when it feels like a game. So you might as well aim to make a game to begin with. So another big question I often comes up is the look and feel, the visuals, the sounds, the music, the etc. And it's tricky. The final visuals of your game is a combination of your art style, your capabilities to deliver the art assets themselves to a high quality, and of course the rendering systems and feature sets you're using in your engine. And it's very difficult, if not impossible, in a prototype to represent the final look of the game. In fact, I think it's pretty much impossible because it takes so long to establish the art style, to establish the pipelines for the high quality models. Often you have to redo models at the end of development because you figured it out how to do them high quality by the end of the development. Not to mention that all the optimized features and atmospheric effects and whatever, in the beginning, they are going to grind your game to a halt. And by the end of the development, you can optimize them to a level where the game is properly playable. So it's very difficult to add everything. I mean, if you can, awesome. but it's very unlikely. And so you have to, again, find a good way to mix and match. It's unlikely that you can demonstrate all of them. So you pick just what you believe you can do. I've seen some interesting versions of this. I think it's important that you focus on the art style. I think you should definitely define it, even if you can't turn it into in-game assets. Create target mockups, faked screenshots, whatever, which just demonstrate how you envisage the final game to look like. Even if you can't make it move, they're really useful. And also you can use them inside the game. So what we've done with some of the prototypes is that before the level started, we added on the screen a target mockup of this is how the level is going to look like. And then we've thrown you into a development art level. And it was okay because they, in their heads, whoever played the game, they had this vision of what the game is going to look like. And then thereafter they can focus on the gameplay. So target mockups and faked screenshots are very, very useful. I've seen cases where they had a separate executable where they just shoved in every visual rendering pipeline effects and everything that could just shoved in there, and that run like 1 frame per hour, but it didn't matter because that was not meant for gameplay. It was just meant to show this is what we expect to do. Some other games, when they have final assets already early on, but not for the full game, then they make one single room, which is a demonstration room, and then the rest of the game is development art. Once again, this is down for a personal choice, but my suggestion is to pick between either show near ready visuals or a visual appearance representative of your final game in your prototype, or use development art. Being in between is very dangerous. Oftentimes, I've seen this happen, and I heard it from publishers that a game prototype was rejected because they said, "Well, this game doesn't look good," and that was because the assets in there were original assets and they were high quality enough, but not good enough for a public release, and they misunderstood. They thought this is how the game is intended to look. So be very, very cautious. Whatever assets you put in, communicate it very clearly. Honestly, communicate inside the game. Put it on the loading screen. Explain what level the art is, what you're trying to do. Because I've seen it. It sounds silly, but I've seen this happen, that people misunderstood and they didn't understand what's part of a crazy art style and what is just a visual bug. Again, I've seen that happen. And so be very conscious about it and try to make it consistent. Even if it's all just placeholder art, even if it's just all development art, try to make it look neat and tight and just pleasant to the eye. It doesn't have to be ugly just because it's development art, and make it consistent throughout. As far as music and sound goes, if you have your own, that's great, use it. Otherwise, steal it. Now, obviously, you can only do that, and I mean borrow it. You can only do that if this doesn't go anywhere. And ideally, use license-free music or get the permission of the artist or whatever. And you can't use that, obviously, if you go public in any way. But let's be real. Behind closed doors, when you're doing a prototype in a few weeks, it is very unlikely that you will have the time or budget to commission original music, for example. So frankly, just look up licensed music, and if you don't find and you have a music you really like from a film or whatever, just use it. But again, it's only for internal use, and be absolutely transparent to the publisher that this is not your music that you're using. Be very, very clear and state that it is owned by them, it's not owned by us, it's only for internal use. Do all that, right? Obviously, we have to be very decent. The good news is that there are a lot of license-free music which you can use. So you don't even have to be cheeky. And there are a bunch of sound effects as well, which you can buy for real cheap, and you can just put it in your game. Sound and music will elevate your prototype immensely. And people, I think, often make the mistake of not do that. So definitely focus on that. There are some additional stuff. I think I still have a couple of minutes. There's a little bit of an additional stuff is that, once again, remember that there is a difference between a prototype you're building because for yourself, a prototype that you're building for your own, whatever your purposes you have, and it's completely different often from the prototype that you're building for someone else. I know that there is the actual experience, there might be a huge overlap, but you have to remember that this is a sales tool. It has to be honest, but it has to focus on the things that your audience wants to see. And again, they want to understand what the game is, and they want to understand your ability to be able to deliver that game. And you need to make it easy for them to experience it. So, for example, make it easy to access. I've got prototype invites where they shared it in like this mysterious site where I have to create an account to register to download. Then there was a slow download speed, and frankly, it took every ounce of professionalism to download and then unzip. And then it was not obvious how to run it. And it's just, don't do that. Like, make it simple. Frankly, put it on Steam. Like, if it's a PC game, I create an account, it's a hidden game, allow people to download, put it on test flight, create a web link, create a web playable version if your game is small enough to do that. Like, make it as easy as possible for people to play, I mean, that's the ideal case, is that I click a link and I can play the game. Just, you have to make it as easy as possible. These people who will review your games, they're going to review a lot of games, and you want to make it as easy for them as possible to do their job. And the next step to that is make a video version. Now, it happens that with one pitch I helped, it was not my own pitch, I just helped another company to do it. They got the deal through a video. They made a prototype. They shared it with an executive who clicked on it, watched the video whilst they were waiting at the airport. Before they boarded the plane, they sent back an email that, okay, we are going to send a term sheet when I land, because there was just so easy access. So I think it's always a good idea to back up your playable with also a video. It makes it easier as well for people internally to share. Imagine that the scout or the early review person who's going to look at your game, they will have to elevate this to their bosses. They're going to write a report on it. They're going to take screenshots, whatever. If you make a video when it's already there, it's so easy for them to do this, to send it to an executive who frankly might not have the time to install your game. I've also seen versions where people added narration over a video version. It doesn't have to be edited, by the way. If you can edit it nicely, that's great, but don't sweat too much about it. Just show the gameplay as is. Sometimes that's even better than an edited trailer. So they had this, which was almost completely unedited. It was like a let's play style, and they narrated the video. Super functional. Like, I could listen to the video and I can understand the intent behind, and they come through with parts which they're really excited about. They can point things out in the game that I might have missed when I played the game, but when I'm demoing the game, they can show me of that cool feature because they know what to do. They understand what is the best performance of the game. Frankly, you might have a better PC than I do, and they might run better on yours. It's just a really nice way. And also, your passion about the games comes through and you explain the game. When you play your own game and you talk about it, again, the best example I've seen, it was 3 senior members of the team playing it together and commentating on the game together, and it was almost like a behind-the-scenes feature in a Blu-ray. I found it amazing. It was really, really informative. So I think I'm out of time. But to sum it up, prototyping is a tool. Pitch document is a tool. Everything else at your disposal here is a tool. And just you have to remember that the publisher is not your enemy, but the publisher has a different set of objectives. They might think that your game is amazing, but that's not what they need right now. They might think that your game is mediocre, but they believe they can help you and they give you feedback and turn it into a game, because that's exactly what they need strategically. It could be that you click with the person better or worse, whoever is listening to your game. So there's a lot of factors coming into this. Try to understand the publisher, try to understand the person you're talking to, make them talk about what they care about, and then use these tools to make sure that they understand what the game is exactly, and they understand that you have the ability to deliver that game. I'd like to finish there because I've run out of time. I don't know if you have time for questions at all, but I'm available if there is time.
Imre, thank you very much indeed. As always, passionate and comprehensive in equal measure. Has anyone got any questions for Imre? You may have some overnight, you never know. Well, we are running a little bit behind, so I'm not going to delay too much. Thank you, Imre, for that. Thanks to all the speakers today, but I think most of all, thanks to the actual delegates, the people who've been doing the real work. Today for me has been great. I've actually learned a lot. Hopefully others will have done as well. I think tomorrow we've got again a packed schedule where we sort of start a different way, the other way around. We've got 3 very, very good speakers that are coming. It's Cassia, Cremena and Dan are going to be delivering 3 talks in the first part of the day. And then we've got some more pitching and practicing and feedback sessions. I'm going to have a chat with Sylvia after this anyway, just to make sure we've got that stuff balanced right, given what we've done today. But most importantly, I'd urge all of you who are on the call to just reflect a little bit. Say it's not a competition, but think about the pitches that you made today and think about what you've potentially picked up on that journey, and think about how you might adjust from the feedback that you've got from colleagues here, plus of course the tips that you may have learned. Cool.